So that we're in an unprecedented moment, brother. We really are. We're in one of the pivotal moments in the history of the species. The species itself could go under given the ecological catastrophe or nuclear catastrophe. We've got escalating levels of wealth inequality that are out of control. The greed is running amok. And then the levels of corruption. I mean, I think, for example, of the great Dostoevsky's first lines of Notes from Underground. I'm a sick man. I'm a spiteful man. I'm a most unpleasant man. I've got a liver disease. America's a sick empire. It's a spiteful empire. It's the most unpleasant empire. We've got a number of wonderful human beings on the inside. We've got some movements on the inside. We've got some magnificent, courageous, and visionary citizens on the inside, but we are losing. We are losing. We're resisting, but we're still losing. The greed, the hatred, Wall Street, Pentagon, they are in control of the empire and they are taking it off a cliff. And the sad thing is that the rest of the world has to deal with some of the ugly consequences and effects. But I'm not despairing. I'm not paralyzed by despair, but I'm very honest and candid about the darkness. All empires have the look of the Grand Inquisitor of Dostoevsky, using that miracle and mystery and authority into magic, rationalization, mystification in order to justify tyrannical acts, despotic acts, anti-democratic acts that subordinate those Stone call everyday people. And I'm a radical Democrat and a radical Christian. I always start with the plight and predicament of the wretched of the earth, those who are priceless and precious, but those who are viewed as disposable. Now, we have magnificent white brothers and sisters who are part of the Black Lives Matter movement. We have magnificent white brothers and sisters who are part of serious struggle against white supremacy, but they got a lot of cousins, and their cousins are easily misled by the strong man. And this is, of course, a challenge that Plato saw in the Republic. He said, show me a democracy, and I'll show you citizens who were shot through with unruly passion and ubiquitous ignorance that will result in the rise of a strong man, the rise of a tyrant, of a despot. That's Plato in the Republic, going all the way back to 360-some BC. He had an insight, even though he was the great critic of democracy and hated democracy because it killed his mentor, Socrates. He had an insight. How do we get to the working class? How do we get to poor folk so that they're not misled, what Marx called false consciousness, so they're not channeling their resistance in a way that reproduces their own oppression, reproduces their own domination? Yeah, I'm glad you brought F. Scott Fitzgerald up because he understood. Of course, he went to Princeton, and I'm in Princeton right now. He understood the spiritual decay and the moral vacuity of the ruling class, not all, but most. He understood that they substitute prosperity for magnanimity. They have hardly any sense of moral excellence and spiritual greatness. It's reduced down to things and possessions and commodities. And it reminds me of the greatest figure to come out of Princeton, who is Eugene O'Neill, and The Iceman Cometh, the greatest indictment of the American empire ever written for the stage. And what did he say? What does it profit a nation to gain the whole world and lose its soul, tied to its forms of idolatry in which it is obsessed with? Greed, power, wealth, status, and spectacle with no moral and spiritual substance. That is a moment for the American Gibbon. That's the moment for the decline and fall of the American empire. That's what Eugene O'Neill was talking about. And he and F. Scott Fitzgerald, very close, on the same register in terms of seeing through the emptiness and vacuity of so much of American life in its obsession with ephemeral pleasures and military power and status and the inability to, at the deepest level, and this is Shakespearean, this is Hamlet, to suffer from the inability to cultivate the capacity to love, the lovelessness. No matter how much money you have, no matter what your status is, if you can't learn how to receive love and give love, that's hell. Dostoevsky and the Brothers Karamazov defines hell as those who suffer from the incapacity to love. And that's what Martin King understood. I come from a people, Black people, hated for 400 years in the United States, but dishing out so much love. John Coltrane's Love Supreme, Toni Morrison's be loved. Martin Luther King, love warrior. Stevie Wonder, love in the need of love. We haven't got to Ray Charles yet. We haven't got to Aretha Franklin. The establishment knows, very much like the Republican Party establishment was undercut by Trump, that young people on the street, the Black Lives Matter movement, they understand not just the limitations of the neoliberal leadership, no matter what color, but they know that it cannot deliver. Look at what the pandemic right now. It cannot deliver safety. It cannot deliver protection. It cannot deliver education. It cannot deliver goods and services. Why? Because the empire is in shambles when you have so much greed and corruption and indifference toward the suffering, with no public life, no public health care, no public, robust public interactions, and we can't even hardly have a public conversation. Well, again, Dostoevsky has a wonderful metaphor of the Crystal Palace, going back to 1851, Joseph Paxton's edifice of seemingly having this wonderful shine, this glass menagerie. Well, what happens when it becomes more colorful with different races, same class hierarchy, same imperial policies, same levels of poverty, same levels of decrepit education, same levels of unemployment and underemployment, same levels of inability to gain access to decent housing. But it's more colorful. You got Black folk now, brown folk now, women at the top, at the glass menagerie, in the Crystal Palace. Oh, really? Now they themselves end up reproducing the same kind of decadence, the same kind of decay. But now, of course, we've got race relations seemingly looking better. No, you don't measure the plight of Black people or women or brown people by how their elites are doing. You measure the plight in terms of what the prisons look like, what their neighborhoods look like, what their employment actually is, what levels of health care they have. But that's precisely the attempt of America to shift serious talk about the plight of poor folk to the upward mobility of the few. And that has to be radically called into question. That is happening on the streets right now in the U.S. empire. And by exemplary, what I mean is leaders of integrity who are willing to tell the truth and will more than likely have to give their lives. Because those who are committed to the struggle for the wretched of the earth are on the road to crucifixion. That's the way the world is. But their blood, our blood, fertilizes the next wave of resistance and critique. That's what we've learned from the Black movement. Well, K Street in general generates legalized bribery and normalized corruption within the halls of Congress. So the very house that is supposed to be the house of the people caters much more to the donors and the benefactors than it does the suffering people themselves. That's precisely why so many American citizens look at the system in the United States and say it cannot reform itself because the money is overwhelming. It's been colonized by the lobbyists who are tied to corporate elites, tied to financial elites. So that it makes it very difficult for those of us in the streets to feel as if we can actually have the kind of impact that we like, but we do it because it's right, because it's moral, and because it's just. And so when it comes to ecological catastrophe, in which the whole species, the planet itself can go under, and you still have the greed, the short-term thinking, the obsession with profit, you can begin to see just how barbaric predatory capitalism is for the species in regard to our very preservation.